Hello, Minecraftians. I say welcome. Welcome to another edition of Realm News. I am your host, the Dark Lord, the one who puts the real in Realm and expands your mind one block at a time. And fall is here. Well, at least at Realm News this week. And it's close enough, right? September 12th, close enough in my book. Cookies, cake, and pumpkin pies are the subjects on today's show, folks. Yes, we will be gleaming through the Overworld's delectables by exploring the history of each of them, how to craft them, and the benefits of doing so. This will all be coupled with the reel of the show, where I will tell you the history behind the cookie, cake, and pumpkin pie. And each history is truly fascinating. Learning about the origin of desserts, these three in particular, was just extremely fun. I think you will all enjoy this episode if you like desserts. You will have something to talk about with your loved ones around the holidays, at least. But before we go into the real and the realm of the show, folks, I will, as tradition on Realm News, read the results from another fascinating poll for this new week. So whenever you are all ready, let's start the show. It's poll time! Yes, it is poll time, everybody, where I read off one of my weekly polls. I must say that poll time this week will be a little short. No one had anything to say on this week's poll, surprisingly enough, but we had a decent turnout, and that's why I have no clue for all this, the shyness all of a sudden. It just confuses me. No one had anything to say about desserts, I guess. But if you personally want to participate in these polls, please go to bio.link /realmnews and click on the Reddit icon. It will direct you to Realm News' Reddit, where I typically post a new poll every Saturday. Now, this poll this week is specific to the subject on desserts. It got a total of 54 votes, which I consider to be a great turnout. I asked, which dessert do you craft most? Pumpkin pie, cookies, cake, or nothing at all? Allow me to read the results. The loser of this week's poll when it comes to dessert is the cookie, with 6 votes, or just 11% of the votes. Not a big share of the pie. Yes, pun intended on that. This kind of boggled my mind a bit because the cookie is the most economical to craft out of the 3. You can make a lot of cookies with little material. Perhaps it is because it has an extremely low hunger replenishment and saturation rate. That's the only reason I can come up with. What do you all think? Let me know at my Twitter or Reddit. Moving on to third place in this poll, with 13 votes, is the pumpkin pie. The pumpkin pie more than doubled the votes of the cookie. This does not shock me, and I think that the cake outbeats the pumpkin pie because it is just so festive. The cake just beat the pumpkin pie by 1 vote, with a total of 14 votes. And I believe that won because it can be shared with your friends that join you in your realm or in your world. And you can top it off with a candle. So you can do a little bit more with that. You know what I mean? A pumpkin pie, you can just simply eat. You can't even put it out on display like the cake, which also makes it more like a decorative piece for a room. That is my reasoning on why the cake beat the pumpkin pie. But the winner of this poll, with 21 votes, has nothing to do with dessert at all. This is the nothing group. These voters do not make dessert at all, which is a huge shock to me. I had always thought that everyone else out there were making desserts in their kingdoms and worlds or empires. I guess it's just not a priority for most Minecraftians. Like I said, a complete shock to me. I'm guessing they that they more than likely use these resources for desserts for other things in the game. Maybe for feeding cattle or just raising chickens for those resources. I personally voted for the pumpkin pie because it is my realm's national dish. But I will admit that I have only made one of those pies, ever. So I am guilty of not crafting these fascinating desserts in my own overworld as well. But I am going to change that in the future. After making this episode, I am all about desserts now. Perhaps this episode will convince some of you listeners out there to craft some of these desserts for yourself. Now, let's move on to the reel of the show, where we have a very interesting segment this episode. We will be covering the history of all three desserts in the overworld: pumpkin pie, cookies, and cake. Let's get started. I would like to welcome you all to the real segment of Realm News, the part where I do my best to tie in real-world knowledge with the game of Minecraft. As you all know, we are talking about desserts today, specifically the desserts known as pumpkin pie, cookies, and cake. But what is a dessert exactly? Dessert, like art, is subjective, meaning dessert is different in each culture and has changed throughout history. Let's talk about dessert. According to an article written by Livia Gershon titled "The Invention of Dessert," published August 21st, 2019, and found at daily.jstor.org, the invention of the word dessert can be traced back to 17th century France, which is fascinating to know and does not surprise me too much. The French are known for having great food, and why would dessert be any different? Before the modern day word that we know as dessert evolved to become the word dessert, it had a different name and function. Dessert before the word dessert, it was called entremets, or meaning intervals in English. The word entremets is French, so intervals, if that makes sense. And these intervals were smaller dishes that were served in between larger courses throughout the entirety of the meal. These entremets could be sweet or savory. It was more varied back then and was not just a sweet treat at the end of the meal. This could be either or, sweet, savory, and could be introduced to you after the first round during the meal. So if that just makes a little bit of sense and gives a little context to you. So it's a little bit different than what we're accustomed to in our day and age. And the term entremets was eventually replaced by the word dessert. Let's break down the word dessert a wee bit. Dessert, in fact, derives from a French verb, desservir, which literally means to clear the table, which clearing the table can be traced back to a form of etiquette during that time period. Heck, perhaps this is still a custom form of etiquette somewhere still being practiced today. This is when all the napkins and tablecloths would be changed before the final course was served. Desservir morphed to the noun dessert. However, the aristocratic elite and royalty would not call it this. People who resided in the upper echelons of society would refer to this course as, quote-unquote, le fruit, meaning in English, fruit. It was called le fruit because desserts in the 17th and 18th centuries were typically composed of a fruit base, such as jams and other fruit preserves. They would also serve cookies, meringues, frozen desserts, and marzipan, which I had to look up what marzipan was or is. Marzipan, which according to Wikipedia is a, quote, confection consisting primarily of a sugar and almond meal, sometimes augmented with almond oil or extract. It is often made into sweets. Common uses are chocolate-covered marzipan and small marzipan imitations of fruits and vegetables, end quote. Which does not sound that appealing to me, if I was to be quite frank. It doesn't sound that great. But perhaps it's extremely delicious. I don't know. As time progressed, dessert took on a different role. It became less of an edible delicacy at the end of a meal for aristocrats. Instead, it became a display of wealth. Dessert in the form of sugar was used to make elaborate sculptures and displayed at these grandiose gatherings for the elite. They were these dioramas made of sugar. These displays were simply for looking and gawking at during these events. They were not designed to taste good. But after the French Revolution, the aristocrats were indirectly forced to abandon these obscenely expensive dessert displays, and also the word le fruit was dropped and replaced by the commoner's tongue with the word dessert. Sugar became very scarce after the revolution, and that is one reason that the politicians after the revolution quit having expensive sugar displays. Not because they could not afford it, but simply for a good public relations image, as politicians do. It wasn't until the late 18th century to the early 19th century that technological advancements in the food industry made sugar inexpensive to the everyday person. Now that we have a rudimentary understanding on the general history of dessert, I would like to now venture into a very famous fall dessert here in the United States of America: pumpkin pie. Not too many things are more American than pumpkin pie. Quite literally. Pumpkin pie, as you are all aware, is made from a squash that is originally from the Americas. Pumpkin. You would know this if you listened to episode 15, Pumpkins Part 1. Go back to that episode if you want to learn more on the history of the pumpkin. Today, we are looking into how pumpkins were used to make pumpkin pie. After the New World was discovered by the Europeans, the pumpkin was one of the first foods to be brought back to Europe from the New World. The pumpkin is first written about in 1536, and a few decades later, it was being grown all around England. England at this point had centuries of baking under its belt, so when pumpkins were introduced to England, it was greeted happily by the pie-making community. The settlers in the New World also made a lot of different foods out of pumpkin. One reason for this is because pumpkin in bread does not require as much flour as opposed to regular bread without pumpkin. So it was more economical to make, and so very beneficial to the budding colonies of the New World. There were a few ways that people made pumpkin pie a couple hundred years ago, such as a French cookbook written in 1653. Talk about blowing the dust off that one. One recipe in this cookbook is over pumpkin pie. It instructs the cook to boil the pumpkin in milk before putting it in pie crust. I imagine this was a way to soften the meat part of the pumpkin, in the interior of it, and probably added some flavor to it before putting it in the crust, to make the pie. Another recipe found in a cookbook titled The Gentlewoman's Companion, written by Hannah Woolley in 1670, this instructs you to make the pie in alternating layers by using these ingredients: pumpkin, apple, spiced rosemary, sweet marjoram, and a bit of thyme. It actually kind of sounds tasty if you ask me. I would try it out. But crust was not always used, as it turns out. This article provides us an example of how colonial New Englanders would eat pumpkin for dessert. They would hollow out the pumpkin and fill it with a spiced, sweetened milk. They would then cook it straight on the fire until it was done, kind of like that French recipe that I described earlier. This is another recipe that I would kind of be curious to try. I don't know. I'm sure there's some very niche bakers or cooks out there that still do this. Heck, if you're out there, I would try this. I do not know why that sounds appetizing, but I think it is mostly my curiosity that makes me want to taste that method of pumpkin pie. Apparently, though, the English back then did the exact same thing, but added apple to the pumpkin's cavity. By the early 18th century, pumpkin pie had cemented itself in the New World and became tied to Thanksgiving. An interesting fact that took place in Colchester, Connecticut in 1705 was that the town had a shortage on molasses right around Thanksgiving. The town, in reaction to this, postponed Thanksgiving for 1 week to give more time to produce enough molasses for everyone in town so they could make pumpkin pie. Isn't that just astonishing, folks? We wouldn't do that today in America. Heck, the day after Thanksgiving, we're trampling people over and killing them by trying to get a big screen TV. But people, I guess, back then were just a little bit, a little bit more in the holiday spirit, a little bit more generous around holidays. Kind of sad. But moving out of the 18th century to the 20th century, to 1929 to be precise, a Chicago meat cannery called Libby's Meat Canning Company started to roll out the first production of pumpkin puree in a can. This became a huge success, and people around the country shifted to buying canned pumpkin for making their pies. This saved on so much time and labor. The old way of making it was just very laborious because people would have to roast and strain the pumpkin before putting it in the crust. And who doesn't want more time to relax with family around the holidays instead of straining a squash all day? Much easier to open a can. Sounds like a no-brainer to me. As an American, I can personally speak that pumpkin pie is still a huge mainstay around Thanksgiving. I would be curious to know how you around the world eat pumpkin pie. Write in and let me know. Now, moving on from the pumpkin, I would like to talk about cookies. Where did they come from? What are their history? Let's find out. Cookies. Everyone knows what a cookie is, right? Well, maybe. To you listeners who are American, you know what I mean when I say a cookie. But a cookie can have a different meaning in another part of the world or culture, such as in the United Kingdom. They may refer to it as a biscuit. This article found at foodtimeline.org has interesting information regarding why Americans say cookie and the British say biscuit. It boils down to two things: the Dutch arriving at the beginning of America, and America trying to separate itself from quote-unquote all things British after the American Revolution. The word cookie in America can be traced back to the Dutch word koek, meaning cake. The diminutive word to cook is koekjes, meaning little cakes or cookies. Dutch immigrants first introduced I can't speak now. That tongue twisted me, that Dutch word, koekjes. Dutch immigrants first introduced the word koekjes to the colonies around 1600. By the 1700s, the word koekjes was influenced by the English language, morphing it into the familiar word as we know it today, cookie. So there you have it, the origin for the word cookie. But what about the biscuit? According to the Oxford English Dictionary entry for biscuit found in this article on foodtimeline.org, biscuit, quote, a kind of crisp, dry bread, more or less hard, prepared generally in thin, flat cakes. The essential ingredients are flour and water or milk without leaven, or leaven, however you say that word. But confectionery and fancy biscuits are very variously composed and flavored. Even the characteristic of hardness implied in the name is lost in the sense a kind of small baked cake, usually fermented, made of flour, milk, etc., used according to Webster in the United States. And the word cookie in Scotland, quote, the usual name for a baker's plain bun. In the United States, usually a small flat cake, a biscuit in the United Kingdom, but locally a name for small cakes of various form with or without sweetening, end quote. I found that all to be very interesting. Now, moving on from the etymology and definition of the cookie has a rich history. In fact, the cookie was probably predated by the cracker, and that is where it got its roots started. They theorize that Neolithic farmers around 10,000 years ago, or around 8,000 BCE, according to my math, they would mash water and grain together in order to make a paste. They would then put this paste on a stone and heat it over a heat source to harden it or crisp it up. And voila, you have a simple Neolithic cracker. Probably not the tastiest thing on earth. Probably tastes like earth, I just imagine. But as time progressed, the cracker more than likely started to transform into the more familiar type cookie that we know of today. SmithsonianMag.com has an intriguing article that I highly suggest you all checking out, titled The Timeless Draw of Decorating Cookies, written by Joan Bailey, published February 28th, 2023. This article is highlighting decorated biscuits, the English version of a cookie. These are hard, thin, wafer-looking biscuits with very intricate designs on them. I stated earlier that cookies may have derived from crackers 10,000 years ago. Well, they started to become much more tastier around the 7th century. The Middle East was experimenting with spices and sweets. In Persia during the 7th century, they were making some very sweet treats by kneading dough with sesame oil and filling it with sugar and almonds. I mean, that sounds tasty. Who doesn't like sugar and almonds? That treat is called, and I am going to butcher this word. You guys are going to hear me butcher a few of these because I believe this is an Arabic word, and yeah. So this treat was called the kushkananaj. And yes, I know that I butchered it. They also had another treat called kuleja. This was made similar to the kushkananaj, but it incorporated a type of mold into the recipe. Yummy! I'm sure it tasted good. I mean, cheese and yogurt is all mold-based or cultured, if you know what I mean. Europe during the Middle Ages did not have sugar during the time that the Middle East was enjoying sugary delectables. However, they did find ways to make biscuits sweet by using honey as an alternative to sugar. Probably much healthier too. They would also make wafers that were usually unsweetened. They would use metal casts with intricate images molded into these metal casts that would leave impressions or designs in the cookie. These images were typically religious themed, and it was the clergy who pressed these wafers for Christian communion. In fact, these wafers were in such demand that a wafer making guild was founded in Paris in the year 1270. But the wafer, biscuit, or cookie, whatever you want to call it, did not go sugar-free forever, as you all well know. It was not until the end of the infamous Crusades during the 10th century that sugar was introduced into Europe. The soldiers brought it back to their home countries from their time at war. It spread from there. The biscuit or cookie just became more and more elaborate as the centuries progressed. Picture cookies, an art form of cookie design, became very popular in Northern Europe amongst the pre-Christian Germanic tribes, and is said to have started hundreds of years ago during a festival called Jules Fest. People would shape dough into animals for effigies. These dough effigies were a replacement for an actual animal sacrifice. It is believed that people made these cookies as an economical alternative to killing their own farm animals. Picture cookies are now a true art form. The SmithsonianMag.com article shows some amazing, intricate works of cookie art by biscuit artist Ella Hawkins. My favorite picture that I saw on this website are the biscuits the artist made that resemble Roman-era pottery sherds. This picture looks as if a Roman vase had just broken and shattered upon the floor. Go check out the link provided and see their artwork for yourself. It is highly worth seeing. The cookie has been an essential treat for humankind for centuries and is not only for consuming, but are literal works of art. Bakers around the world are turning these delights into a canvas, painting amazing scenes with frosting instead of oil paint. Now that we know the general history of the cookie or biscuit and how it evolved throughout the ages, I would like to now turn our attention over to the cake, or koek, as the Dutch called it, as we learned earlier. Cake is a very familiar dessert that I am sure you are all aware of. It's seen at many important life events, such as at weddings, birthdays, baby showers, anniversaries, graduations, and many other special occasions that occur in life. But I am sure that most of you, including myself, have not thought much more about cake than to eat it. Well, I am here today to cap off the real segment of the show by going into the cake's history. We have learned earlier that the word cookie was borrowed from the Dutch word koekjes, meaning small cakes. Well, drop the yuz part and you have the Dutch word for cake, koek, spelled K-O-E-K. It is thought that the word cake may have derived from the word cook, which to me makes sense. Phonetically, they sound somewhat similar and it would not be a far-fetched notion. But according to Mash.com's article titled The Strange Untold History of Cake, written by Helena Nichols, published August 24th, 2023. There is another word that popped up in the English language from around 13th century that was not of Dutch origin, but was of Swedish descent. The word kaka and still means cake today in the Swedish language. I find the theory of the word cake deriving from the Swedish word kaka to have influence, because it is still actively used in the Swedish language. It is still alive and is living evidence. But this is just a personal thought. Cake has a very rich and vibrant history that I was completely not aware of until reading this article. Cake is a very old sweet treat that stems all the way back to ancient Egypt, if you can believe that. The type of cakes that the ancient Egyptians were making would not be familiar to you or I. These were more of a bread than a fluffy cake that we know and enjoy today. Ancient Egyptian cakes were made of grains and were sweetened by adding honey and dried fruits to it. They would also add nuts and wine. Sounds to me like they were making granola bars with a kick and not cakes. Supposedly, they did not distinguish a difference between bread and cake back then. These ancient versions of cake did, however, help set the path for cakes to develop as time progressed. And time did progress. It progressed to the year 230 CE in ancient Greece, where they invented my favorite type of cake, cheesecake. But back in the year 230 CE, they called it placenta. And no, not that placenta. This is a very old dessert, so this word had a totally different meaning back then. This word is a derivative word of plakos in Greek. This ancient cheesecake became very popular because the Romans started to make it as well. They would use it as a libum, which was a special cake for religious ceremonies in Rome. Europe was making their version of dense bread cakes a bit different. They were making fruit cakes and gingerbread cakes due to its longer shelf life and practicality. Cake just took a completely different form than what we were used to back then. This version of dense bread-like cake baking lasted well into the 1600s. It wasn't until kitchen technology became more advanced that cakes started to evolve for the better. As I just mentioned, it was not until 1600s when cakes changed entirely, all thanks to some new kitchen technology and ingredients. Refined sugar and ring molds. Refined sugar helped make cakes retain their moisture and gave it a smoother texture. This refined sugar was more than likely imported from New Guinea into Europe. The ring molds were also an amazing advancement. Before ring molds, bakers would bake formless blobs on sheets, or they would have to try to shape the cake by hand to the desired shape, but you can all imagine how much of a hassle that would be. That would be a pain. Ring molds solved that problem. They allowed for perfectly circular cakes that bakers were able to stack on top of each other, allowing them to make literal towers of cake for events. These cake molds were made out of a few different materials, either metal, wood, or paper. But these ring molds were able to adjust to different sizes, which is very handy for making different size cakes. These cakes in the ring molds had a baking sheet underneath them in order to keep them from falling out of the ring mold while transferring in and out of ovens. The oven was another crucial piece of baking technology. They were becoming more advanced in the way of being able to control the temperature. By the end of the 1700s, cast iron stoves were being made where you could control the temperature. Can you just imagine being able to have some control on the temperature of your oven for the first time? I am sure this was an amazing feeling back then. We take for granted our ovens today. As you can imagine, these temperature-controlled ovens became very popular in common households and were great for baking cakes. Now let's top off this cake with icing. Icing, as this Mash.com article points out, is something that we tend to spread on cake after it cools off, not when it is warm. So that way, the icing does not soak into the cake. I had no clue of this procedure. I would probably just put it on the cake while it's still hot, like how they did back in the 1600s, as it turns out. They intentionally wanted this icing, which was made of egg whites and sugar, to soak right into the sponge while it was warm. This is where the term icing came from. It looks like literal ice. In fact, the first mention of icing being used as a verb to ice something comes into existence in the 1600s. And the first recorded recipe to be written using the word icing comes from a person named Rebecca Price in 1655. However, the first recorded cake that had an icing on top of it was in 1494. It was an icing made of an almond and sugar paste, similar to what we call marzipan today, which I covered what marzipan was earlier, if you remember. This marzipan type of icing was adorned on top of a thin British cake that was called Mark Fane. I thought that was just completely interesting. Icing has evolved throughout the centuries. In the United States, we are more familiar with an icing or frosting that is a type of buttercream. American buttercream is primarily made of sugar and butter, as opposed to many other cultures around the world which incorporate egg in their buttercream. There is so much more to the history of cakes, the technology behind them, and the additional add-ons to cakes that I could discuss. But I would have to create a whole separate podcast dedicated to cakes in order to discuss all of that. So I will leave it here. It is now time for us to leave the real and portal ourselves into the realm of the show, where we can take a look at how pumpkin pie, the cookie, and cakes function in Minecraft. Welcome to the realm, my friends. We just had a lengthy discussion over the history of 3 real-world desserts: pumpkin pie, cookies, and cake. Well, we are now going to delve into these 3 desserts, but in Minecraft. Now, for myself, I have hardly made any desserts in the game until this past week. I just started to build my first palace for myself, and I decided to put a cake in every room. The guest room has cake, grand entrance hall has cake, and my personal chamber has cake. So cake is all over the Dark Lord's palace. And the palace is ever growing. Each additional room that I add to it, I will also put a cake in it. On that note, let's talk about Overworld pumpkin pie by starting with its history. I know I was talking about cake, but I am going to be getting right into pumpkin pie to begin this off with, okay? This may surprise you like it did me, but pumpkin pie has been around the overworld for quite some time now. 12 years to be precise. According to Minecraft.wiki.com, titled Pumpkin Pie, the chief creative officer at Mojang, who goes by Jeb, first shared with us a screenshot of Pumpkin Pie on September 11th, 2012 through Twitter, now known as X. So happy belated birthday to you, Pumpkin Pie. Today's episode was released on September 12th, 1 day off. Sorry. It was only about a month and a half later that Pumpkin Pie became official in the game. October 25th, 2012 was the release date of the 1.4.2 update, known as the Pretty Scary Update. It was added alongside with witches, bats, zombie villagers, wither skeletons, and many other features. As far as history goes for Pumpkin Pie, it has not changed too much in its life. It had one texture change, which to me looked like a reshading of the orange hue. On April 23, 2019, the 1.14 Java update called the Village and Pillage update allowed villagers with the farmer occupation to throw pumpkin pies to you. They would do this only after you defeated a raid from pillagers and earned the Hero of the Village status effect, which is pretty neat if you ask me. I have defeated many raids, and I have yet to get a pumpkin pie from a farmer. Maybe my villagers just don't like me. I don't know. Oh well. Let's move on to how we craft one of these for ourselves and not have to rely on saving the village for pumpkin pie. It is a very straightforward recipe and not too expensive to craft. It just takes 1 pumpkin, 1 sugar, and 1 egg, and that will yield 1 pumpkin pie. You are able to craft and stack up to 64 of these pumpkin pies in one of your inventory slots, which is a lot of pie, but it may be worth making. It fills up your hunger meter by quite a bit for a dessert. Once ate, it will increase your hunger bar by 8 hunger points, which equals out to be 4 of those turkey leg looking bars that represent your hunger meter, which are technically called ham shanks, not the turkey legs that I always refer to. 1 pumpkin pie will also give you 4.8 saturation points, which saturation points in the simplest sense helps keep your appetite longer. Saturation points keep you full longer, the more saturation points earned from the last thing you ate, if that makes sense. There is no visible bar or meter that indicates your saturation points. It is completely invisible to you, unfortunately. Perhaps one day in a future episode, we will go further into the game mechanics behind saturation points and whatnot. Moving on, if you do not feel like crafting your own pumpkin pie or defeat a raid and become a hero of a village, then you have a couple more options. You could go find a taiga village. There is a slim chance that a pumpkin pie will be stored in a villager's house in a chest there. If you are on Java, you have a 9.7 chance of finding a pumpkin pie. And on Bedrock, it's just slightly better by 1%. We have a 10.7% chance of finding pumpkin pie in a taiga village house. Not a huge advantage, but hey, I'll take it. I have yet to find any pumpkin pie in one of those taiga houses, personally. But I think I have only found one of those type villages in one of those biomes. So I'll keep on exploring. If you do not want to look for a pumpkin pie in a taiga village, then you can trade for pumpkin pie with an apprentice level farmer. I was a little surprised by reading this on Minecraft.wiki. It is actually not a bad deal. 1 emerald will buy you 4 pumpkin pies, but I believe there is only a 50% chance of having an apprentice farmer that sells these. Keep employing farmers until you get one that trades pumpkin pies is my suggestion. One last thing that you might find useful with pumpkin pie besides eating it is that you could use it for composting. Each pumpkin pie will increase the compost level in a composter by 1 level, which is not a bad way to get bone meal. Pumpkin pie is an all-around great overworld dessert. It fills your hunger meter up quite a bit. It's great for bone meal, and it is cheap to make. Now, I would like to move on to our next overworld dessert, the cookie. Cookies. Who doesn't love a cookie from time to time? However, I have never made any in Minecraft, but I plan to do so as soon as this episode is over. According to Minecraft.wiki.com, titled Cookies, cookies were given to the Overworld on March 31st, 2011. In the 1.4 Java Beta Edition, which also added wolves to the Overworld. Cookies and wolves. Can't go wrong there, right? Allow me to tell you how to make these. It is very simple and is a very cheap dessert to make. It only takes 2 pieces of wheat and 1 cocoa bean. Now, this is the astonishing part and the fact of the show here. Combining these simple ingredients will yield a stack of 8 cookies. The cookie is the only item that has a maximum stack of 8 in the game of Minecraft at the crafting table. You can make a lot of cookies with very little ingredients. Wheat is easy to find, but the cocoa beans may prove to be a little more difficult to acquire than if you are not close to a jungle biome. I am sure that you are close to one if you have not found one yet, but if you haven't found one, just keep exploring. I'm sure you will. Cookies can be stacked up to 64 in one inventory slot, so you can store a lot of these cookies once you have the ingredients. You will need a lot of cookies if you expect to sustain yourself solely off of them. These chocolate chip cookies will only power up your hunger meter by 1 ham shank or 2 hunger points. And even after eating one, you will get hungry pretty fast because one cookie only has a saturation of 0.4 per cookie. That is hardly anything. If you want a comparison, think back to the pumpkin pie. It delivers 4.8 saturation. To put that another way, it would take 12 cookies to equal 1 pumpkin pie's worth of saturation points. Moving on. If you do not want to craft your own cookie, you could always attempt to collect some cookies from a villager farmer after defeating a raid against a village. Apparently, the farmer is the villager to be around after winning these battles, because there is a chance that they will throw a cookie to you as a way to say thank you for defending the town. And remember, the farmer also has a chance to toss a pumpkin pie to you as well. So find a farmer while having the hero of the village effect. If this is not the way you want to go about collecting cookies, then you could always trade with the journeyman farmer. I will tell you now, they charge a steep price. They will sell you 18 cookies for 3 emeralds. That seems like a ripoff to me because you could get 4 pumpkin pies for 1 emerald with some farmers. But I suppose if you are not in a biome that has cocoa beans or just not able to find cocoa beans, then this is not a bad way to acquire them. Before we move on to composting cookies, I would like to give a caveat. Do not feed a cookie to a parrot. This will kill the parrot instantaneously. And if you are playing on Bedrock, it will give it the fatal poison effect as it dies. Unless that is what you're trying to achieve, but I do not recommend this. I tell you this as a warning just in case you thought that Polly was hungry and wanted a tasty cracker. Let's move on to composting. And what I am about to say may be very beneficial to some of you players out there who like composting and love to collect bone meal. Cookies may be the most effective compostable food in the game as it turns out. This article breaks it down nicely. Placing a singular cookie in a composter has an 85% chance of raising the compost level up by 1. A composter has 7 levels that need filled before it creates 1 bone meal. I just wanted to put that in perspective. But cookies are very inexpensive. Remember, they take just 2 pieces of wheat and 1 cocoa seed, yielding 8 cookies. I have a better example to give you from the article. Imagine 100 pieces of wheat and 50 cocoa beans being tossed into the composter individually. You could do that in order to make bone meal, but that would yield only 14 bone meal. But listen to this. You could instead turn that 100 wheat and 50 cocoa beans into 400 cookies, which is a lot of cookies. Hopefully we have bundles by the time this is released. You then could toss all those cookies into a composter or composters, and that would yield approximately 48.5 bone meals. That is a significant increase in bone meal, over 3 times the amount of bone meal as opposed to just putting in the individual pieces of wheat and cocoa beans into the composter. All you have to do is combine those ingredients together in a crafting table and make cookies for a much better yield. I hope that this tidbit of information helps some of you Minecraftians out there. The cookie may not fill you up much after eating it, and it will not keep you hungry long just like in real life, but the cookie only takes a couple ingredients that are not hard to find in the overworld, so you can feast on them all day long. But remember, do not feed your pet parrot that cookie. You will not have one for long if you do so. With that said, I would like to move on to our finale dessert in the overworld today, the cake, where we shall have our cake and eat it too here at Realm News. Let's talk cake, people. Cake has an extremely fascinating history. On November 23rd, 2010, Mark Person, aka Notch, the creator of Minecraft, said that he would add cake to the game of Minecraft if Minecraft won the 2010 Indie of the Year Awards. I think you all know the results of the rewards that year. Minecraft won, and the cake was added to the game as Notch promised. It was added to the game in the 1.2 Java Edition beta update, along with some other important items that you may be familiar with, such as charcoal, lapis lazuli, dyes, sugar, squid, bone meal, sandstone, and much more. Cake is an unusual food item in the Minecraft universe. This is not a food that can be consumed from your immediate item bar. No. This dessert has to be set down before being consumed, and once it is set down, it is permanently there until eaten. Not even Silk Touch will allow you to remove it, and nothing can move it, not even pistons. Before we go any further, let me tell you how to craft this. This is one of the most expensive out of all the desserts we discussed today. This one is the cake. This takes 3 buckets of milk, 1 egg, 2 sugars, and 3 wheat. These ingredients combined on the crafting table will produce 1 cake, and you can stack these up to 64 in 1 inventory slot. I must say that it's not difficult to make cake when you have a base setup with a good farm including cattle and chickens. Grow some sugar cane and you are set to craft cake en masse. Once you have your cake, you will want to eat it naturally. There are 7 slices of cake for every cake made. The cool thing about cake is that you and your friends can all eat the same cake at the same time and chow down together. Perfect way to relax after a long day of zombie killing and battling other hostile mobs. Let's talk nutrition. 1 slice of cake has the same nutritional value as 1 overworld cookie. It will raise your hunger bar by 1 ham shank or 2 hunger points, and it has a 0.4 saturation. Not much at all. But if you decide to be greedy and not share your cake with your friends, and you consume all 7 slices by yourself, this will give you 14 hunger points, or will replenish 7 ham shanks on your hunger meter. That will satiate you a little longer, but the pumpkin pie still remains the winner when it comes to filling you up the most as an overworld dessert that we talked about in today's episode. Nonetheless, cake is a great dessert for all of your friends to enjoy together. It is a social dessert, and it is great for celebrations in your world. You can even top the cake off with a candle. Just craft a candle and place it on the cake before eating it. You can put any color of candle on the cake to make it even more personalized, which I think was a great touch by Mojang. To light the candle, you can use a flint and steel, a fire charge, or flaming projectiles to light it from a distance, which I would love to try out. Once you get your cake lit, it will emit a light level of 3, which is not very much. That is half the level of a sea pickle light. Now, the next thing I would like to tell you all is just a fun fact. You are not the only thing in the overworld that loves cake. Pandas love cake as well. Yes, pandas. If you want to test this out, then go to some pandas in the jungle biome and drop a cake down. You have to throw it out. Throw it out. Don't place it down. There's a chance that one will come up to it, collect it, and then eat it. I think that is just a cool addition to the game. And there you have, folks. Cake. It is so good, even a panda can't resist the sugary delight. And the cake just adds a festive flair to whatever the occasion that you are celebrating in your realm. Top it off with a personalized colored candle and light it by shooting a flaming arrow at it. However you make cake, I guarantee you will enjoy having it around. I think it makes a home more like a home in the game, and it can make a kitchen more authentic looking. I hope that you all found some great use out of what was said on cake in this episode today. That brings us to the end of the show, folks. Desserts. We covered them all in one episode today. Pumpkin pie, cookies, and cake. We should all be ready to open up an Overworld bakery now. Or maybe you are just hungry and want to eat some cake now. Dessert adds so much to the Overworld's variety of foods that you can make. It brings a festive feel and is a well-deserved reward after accomplishing a goal or a battle. I love how the cake can be shared with friends and how you can put a candle on top of it. It was fascinating to learn that cookies are a fantastic source for composting as well. But they are also really fun to eat in the game because you can make so many. You can just munch on these all day. Just don't feed them to parrots. Also, it was amazing to learn that the French are the ones who coined the word dessert. But before the word dessert, it was called le fruit. Also, who would have known that cookies may have derived from the cracker back in Neolithic times, transforming over the millennia into the amazing intricate cookies that resemble canvases with beautiful paintings on them. I had such a fun time doing the research for this episode and writing it. I hope you all enjoyed it as well, and that you will get some good use out of the variety of Overworld desserts covered today. I wish you all a great time baking and crafting, and I will see you all again next Thursday on a brand new episode of Realm News. As always, it was an honor to be your host, the Dark Lord, signing out. Hello, Minecraftians. The Dark Lord here. I just wanted to say thank you for listening to the show. If you like the show, please show it by rating it and leaving a review on whatever platform you are listening to. And follow it, please. You can also email me at realmnews247@gmail.com and find the Realm News social media accounts at bio.link/realmnews, all undercase. There, you will find the Realm News Reddit page, Twitter, now X, and the Discord. Join all three and show your support. Tell all your friends and family about the show. See you all next week. Happy crafting.